اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد وعجل.
So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim walad-dallin. Sadaqa Allahu al-Aliyyul Azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we begin this session, this special, painful, necessary session, with two passages from the Book of God. The first is from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, where God, the Most High, says, and this is from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, verses 169 to 171. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And do not think of those who have been killed in the way of God as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision, rejoicing in what God has bestowed upon them of His bounty. And they receive good things about those after them who have not yet joined them, that there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. They receive good tidings of favor from God and bounty, and that God does not allow the reward of the believers to be lost." And the second is from Surah Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, 33rd chapter of the Quran, and it's verse number 23. And God Almighty, He says, "Among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with God. Among them are those who have fulfilled their pledge, and among them are those who are still waiting, and they have never changed in the least." I want you to hold on to that second verse from Surah Al-Ahzab. Among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with God. مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَّقُوا مَا آحَدَ اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. I want you to hold it very carefully in your hearts tonight, because this verse carries a weight that only becomes clear to us, or became clear to us, very recently. On the day that our leader, Imam Sayyed Ali al-Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, was martyred, his official account posted to the world. The message that they posted was this very verse, and we hear this verse very often. When our beloved Sayyid Hassan was martyred, this was said. When Hajj Abu Mahdi was martyred, this was said. All of these. And the verse is, "Among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with God. Among them are those who have fulfilled their pledge, and among them are those who are still waiting, and they have never changed. Not one bit, not 1 inch, not 1 degree." This was his farewell and their farewell. This was his last words to us. And if we truly understand this verse, really understand it, we will understand everything we need to understand about what has happened, how to process it, and what we are supposed to do next. Let us therefore break this verse open. The verse was revealed in the context of the Battle of Ahzab, the Battle of the Confederates, when the entire pagan Arabian community had gathered its forces, along with the Jews, along with others, against the Prophet and the very small community of believers in Medina. The Muslims were surrounded. The hypocrites had abandoned them. The situation looked impossible. And in that moment, at the very point where the weak of heart began to waver, God revealed this verse. He said, "Look at the believers, look at the real ones. They made a covenant with God. And some of them have already given their lives in order to fulfill that covenant. And the rest of them are waiting for their turn. And none of them, not a single one of them, has changed." Now, there are three categories of people that are described over here, and we must recognize all three tonight. The first, among them are those who have fulfilled their pledge. Those who have fulfilled their pledge. These are the martyrs, those who gave everything, those who held the line until their bodies could hold no more. Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, is among these now. 36 years he carried this trust. From the day that the Assembly of Experts placed that weight upon his shoulders on the 4th of June 1989, until the moment the enemies of God struck his compound on the 28th of February 2026. He never wavered, he never bent, he never changed. And as Quran says, وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا, and they have never changed. He survived an assassination attempt in 1981 that left his right hand paralyzed for life. And he never spoke of it as a wound. He spoke of it as a medal, a badge of honor. He led a nation through an 8-year war, through sanctions, through conspiracies of every superpower on this earth. And just 11 days before his martyrdom, standing at the Imam Khamenei Husayniyya in Tehran, he looked at the camera and said, "I want you to hear these words carefully, because they're amongst his last." What he said was, "The Iranian nation knows its Islamic and Shia lessons well. It knows what to do." Imam Husayn, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Someone like me does not pledge allegiance to someone like Yazid." The references, as always, are in the write-up. And then Imam Khamenei said, "In reality, the Iranian nation is saying, a nation like ours, with this culture, this history, and these lofty teachings, will not pledge allegiance to corrupt leaders like those currently in power in America." 11 days later, they assassinated him. But listen to what he said. He did not say, "I will not pledge allegiance." He said, the Ummah, and this doesn't just mean the Iranian people, but the Ummah as a whole, the nation will not pledge allegiance. He was not speaking just about himself. He was speaking about us. He was speaking about the system. He was speaking about the chain that does not break, because it is not held together by one man. It is held together by a covenant with God. He was preparing us. Now, whether he knew the strike was coming or not, only God knows best. His final message was the message of Imam Husayn at Karbala. And just as Imam Husayn's blood did not end the message, but rather amplified it beyond anything a living voice could have achieved, so too the blood of our beloved Imam Khamenei has amplified this message to the entire world. Someone like me does not pledge allegiance to someone like him, Yazid, Trump, Netanyahu, all of these. And a nation like this does not collapse when its leader is taken. Rather, it rises. Now, the second category in the verse. And among those are them who are still waiting. Those who are still waiting for their turn. That is us. We are the ones who are waiting, God willing. Our covenant with God has not yet been fulfilled. We are still here. We are still breathing. We are still standing. And the question that this verse puts to us tonight, the question that the blood of our leader puts to us tonight is not, what has happened? The question is, will you change? As the verse says, وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا, and they have never changed. Will we change our direction? Will we abandon the path? Will we lose our nerve? Will we let the enemies of God see us stumble? That is the test. That is the trial. That is what we call the imtihan, that every generation of this community has faced since Karbala, in fact, since before Karbala. And the answer, the only answer worthy of a people who call themselves the followers of Hussein is وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. and they have never changed. Insha'Allah, we have not changed, and insha'Allah, we will not change. And the third, and this is often missed because it is the implicit category, the ones who did change, the ones who broke their covenant, the ones who wavered, the ones who ran, because this verse does not exist in a vacuum. It comes directly after the description of the hypocrites, the munafiqeen, who had promised God they would stand firm and then fled when the armies came. The verse about the believers is a contrast. God is saying, look at the difference. Look at the hypocrites who promised and broke their promise. And look at the believers who promised and were faithful to that promise, even when it cost them everything and their lives even. Tonight we choose which category we belong to. Now I know many of us are hurting. I know many feel that we have been orphaned. In fact, I've had messages from people saying exactly that. I know many of us woke up on Sunday morning to news that shook us to our very core. Some of us wept. Some of us could not speak. Some of us are angry, a deep, burning anger at the injustice of what has been done. And some of us, and this is the hardest one, some of us are afraid for the future, afraid for the Islamic Republic of Iran, afraid for the system, afraid that the chain has finally been broken. So I am here tonight to tell you three things. The first is that your grief is sacred. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone, not the media, not politicians, not the people on social media and the streets who dance around celebrating his martyrdom. Do not let anyone make you feel ashamed of your tears. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, lost his son Ibrahim, he wept. And when the companions said to him, O Messenger of God, even you weep? Prophet Muhammad replied, the eye weeps and the heart grieves, and we do not say anything except what pleases our Lord. Your grief for a man who spent his life in the service of the Imam of our time is not weakness. It is a sign of faith. The second thing I want to tell you is that this is not new. This is not the first time the enemies of God have killed the leader of the believers. This is a pattern. This is what they do. They killed Imam Ali in the mosque in the month of Ramadan. They killed Imam Husayn on the plain of Karbala. They poisoned Imam al-Kadhim in the prisons of Baghdad. They poisoned Imam al-Rida in Khurasan. Every single Imam, every single one, with the sole exception of our 12th Imam, may our souls be his ransom, who is in occultation, every single Imam was murdered by the tyrants of their age. And what happened after each one? Did the community collapse? Did the message die? Did the chain break? No. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And they never changed. They did not change. Not one bit. The community mourned. The community gathered. The community identified the next leader through the divine system of nas and designation, and the community continued. The chain held, and it will hold now. The third thing I want to tell you, and this is probably the most important, is that you have not been orphaned. You feel orphaned. That is natural, that is understandable. But the reality is very different from the feeling. Because our ultimate leader, the one to whom Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, himself was a deputy, is alive. The Imam of our time, al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return, is alive. He is watching. He has not left. He has not abandoned us. He is the sun behind the clouds. As Imam Sadiq was asked, How can people benefit from a hujjah who is hidden and concealed? To which Imam Sadiq replied, in the same way as they benefit from the sun when it is covered by clouds. The references are all in the write-up. The sun does not cease to exist because a cloud passes over it. Its heat reaches us. Its light sustains us. Its gravity holds the planets in their orbits. And the Imam, even in his occultation, sustains this world, guides its affairs, and watches over his community. Imam Khamenei was a cloud that channeled the light of that sun towards us. He was a deputy, a noble, courageous, faithful deputy. And now God has taken him. But the sun remains, and another cloud will form. Another deputy will rise, because that is the system. That is the design. That is the wisdom of the one who told us 14 centuries ago that the earth can and will never be devoid of a hujjah. And the proof? The proof is happening right now. As we sit here tonight, and I'm sure we all know this, the Provisional Leadership Council of the Islamic Republic has already been formed. The President, the head of the judiciary, and a jurist of the Guardian Council, Ayatullah A'rafi, have assumed their constitutional duties. The Assembly of Experts, the 88 senior scholars whose sole purpose it is to ensure the continuity of this leadership, will convene and select the next Wali al-Faqih. The system has activated exactly as it was designed to do. Exactly as it did in 1989 when Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, answered the call of his master. This is not the behavior of a system in collapse. This is the behavior of a system that was built for this moment. And that resilience, that continuity, that refusal to break is the subject of our session tonight. Shaheed Ayatullah Murtada Mutahhari, may God rest his pure soul, the great philosopher and martyr of the Islamic Revolution, said it best. He said, martyrdom is the injection of blood into the body of society. It is the martyrs who pump new blood into the body and the veins of society. The blood of Imam Khomeini, may God rest his soul, will not be in vain. But it will only become the seed of renewal if we receive it correctly. If we receive it with faith. If we receive it with patience. If we receive it with clarity. And if we receive it with action. This is what we will discuss tonight. We will discuss the theology of martyrdom and the fleeting nature of this world. We will discuss the practical duties of the believer, both for those who followed Imam Khamenei as their Marja al-Taqlid, and for those who looked at him as their Wali al-Faqih. We will discuss the process of succession because it is a clear, well-established, well-tested process, and we deserve to understand this. And we will close, as we always do, with a eulogy and a supplication. But first we must talk about what death means. Because if we don't understand death, we will never understand martyrdom. And if we don't understand martyrdom, we will never understand why the chain has never been broken. Please give me a salawat and we move on to the theology of martyrdom and the fleeting world.
اللهم صل على محمد محمد وعجل فرجه.
So before we talk about processes and constitutions and practical duties, before we talk about what to do next, we must talk about what has actually happened. Not politically, not geopolitically, but theologically. Because the lens through which we see this event will determine everything. If we see it through the lens of the BBC, the CNNs, and the Fox Newses of the world, we will see a military strike that killed a head of state. If we see it through the lens of the enemies of Islam, we will see a victory. And if we see it through the lens of the hypocrites, we will see the beginning of the end. But If we see this through the lens of Quran, through the lens of Ahlulbayt, through the lens of 14 centuries of this community's experience, then you will see something, we will see something entirely different. We will see martyrdom. In our tradition, martyrdom is not a defeat. It is a coronation. It is a monumental victory. Let us begin with a fundamental truth that our tradition teaches us, a truth that the modern world has forgotten and that the enemies of God have never understood. This world is not the destination. It is merely a passage. God says in Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, 3rd chapter of the Quran, verse 185. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Every soul shall taste death, and you will only be given your full compensation on the day of resurrection. Whoever is drawn away from the fire and admitted to paradise has indeed triumphed, and the life of this world is nothing but the enjoyment of delusions." And in Surah Ankabut, the chapter of the spider, the 29th chapter of the Quran, in verse 64, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And this worldly life is nothing but diversion and amusement, and indeed the home of the hereafter, that is the true life, if only they knew." Please pay attention to the language here. God does not say the hereafter is the better life. He says al-Hayawan, which means the true life, the real life. This world, with all of its noise, all of its empires, its missiles, its aircraft carriers, military operations, this world is play and amusement. It is a game, a distraction. The enemies of God think that they have won because they have taken a body. What they do not understand in their abject ignorance is that they have released a soul. They think that they have ended a man. They do not realize that they have elevated a martyr to a station they can never reach, never comprehend, and never touch. Donald Trump stood in the White House or Mar-a-Lago or wherever he was and announced the death of our leader as though he had accomplished something. But what has he accomplished? He has sent a servant of God to God. He has reunited a lover with his beloved. He has given a man who spent his entire life preparing for this meeting the very thing that he yearned for. The question is not whether Imam Khamenei has won or lost. The Quran has already answered that. As we said in Surah Al-Imran, verse 185, "So whoever is kept away from the fire and admitted to paradise has indeed triumphed." The question is about us. The question is always about the ones who remain. Now let us go deeper, because our tradition does not merely say that death is a transition. It says that martyrdom specifically is the highest station a human being can attain. We already recited the verses from Surah Al-Imran at the opening of this session. Let us now return to them with fresh eyes. In Quran, Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, 3rd chapter of the Quran, verse 169, Allah says, "And do not think of those who have been killed in the way of God as dead." This is a command. When Allah says, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ, do not think it. This is an amr, it's an order. Do not even entertain this thought. The martyr is not dead. The Shaheed, the martyr, is alive. Alive with their Lord, receiving provision. Not in the grave, not in the past, not just in memory, but alive in the present tense. Receiving, being given, sustained by God directly. And what is their state? Allah tells us in verse 170, rejoicing because of what God has given them of His grace. Farihin, rejoicing. They are not suffering. They are not regretful or regretting. They are not looking back at this world with longing. They are in a state of joy because of what God has given them of His grace. And here is the part that should pierce every heart in this call. They receive good tidings about those who have not yet joined them. They are looking at us. They are receiving news about us. And they are hoping, praying that we will hold firm, so that when we finally join them, we will arrive with honor and not with shame. No fear upon them, and they do not grieve. Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, does not grieve tonight. We grieve, but he does not. He is where every servant of God hopes to be. And his only concern, if we are to believe the verse, and we must, and we do, his only concern is about us, whether we will hold, whether we will change. Remember the verse, وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا, and they have never changed. I need everyone to see something here. I need everyone to step back and see a pattern. Because what happened on Saturday, what we learnt about on Sunday, is not an isolated event. It is the latest instance of a pattern that has repeated since the beginning of prophethood, since the beginning of time actually. The enemies of God have always killed the righteous, always. And the righteous have always won, always. Go back to the Quran itself. In verse 137 of Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, third chapter of the Quran, God says, there have passed before you patterns of history. So travel through the land and observe what was the end of those who lied or who denied. Sunan, the word means patterns. This is a sunnah of God, a divine pattern that repeats. The tyrant rises, the tyrant kills the righteous, and then the tyrant falls, every time without exception. Look at the prophets. Prophet Yahya ibn Zakaria, John the Baptist, peace and blessings be upon him, was beheaded by a tyrant king because he spoke the truth. Prophet Zakaria, peace and blessings be upon him, was sawn in half by his own people. And where are those tyrants now? They are dust, they are forgotten. Or maybe they're remembered, but as villains and as evil ones in the story of the men, the heroes that they killed. And look at Ahlulbayt, the family of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon them all, our Imams, the 12 lights of guidance. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, struck by the sword of Ibn Muljim in the mosque of Kufa in these coming nights of Ramadan. Where is Ibn Muljim right now? Who follows him? Who builds institutions in his name? Nobody. Because the name of Ali, 1400 years later, rings from the minarets on this earth. Imam Husayn ibn Ali, butchered on the plains of Karbala by the army of Yazid. They killed him. They killed his sons. They killed his companions. They thought they had won. And today, more than 20, 30, 40, even 100 million human beings walk to his shrine every year in the largest peaceful gathering on the face of this earth. The children in Gaza say the name of Husayn in order to give them strength to survive. The resistance fighters say Ya Husayn before launching missiles at the enemies. Where is Yazid? Someone tell me. Yazid is a curse on the tongues of the righteous. Imam Musa al-Kadhim, he was poisoned in the prisons of Harun Abbasi. Imam al-Ridha, poisoned in Khurasan by Ma'mun Abbasi. Imam Muhammad Jawad, Imam Ali al-Hadi, Imam Hassan al-Askari, all of them killed. Every single one. The classical sources that we have, such as Kitab al-Irshad of Shaykh al-Mufid, al-Kafi, Kitab al-Ghaybah, etc., etc., they record for us that not a single imam, except the 12th, who is in occultation, died a natural death. They were all murdered by the superpowers of their age. And what happened after each one? Did the chain break? Did the community dissolve? Did the message die? No. The very opposite. The chain held. A new Imam stepped forward, designated by explicit nas, that we have discussed in our previous Wednesday sessions. The community rallied. The message grew stronger, because the blood of the martyr, as Shaheed Mutahari told us, is the injection of new blood into the veins of society. This is the sunnah of God. The tyrant kills, and the one that was killed is victorious. There is another dimension here that we must understand, because it separates the Islamic concept of martyrdom from the way the Western world understands death in war. In our tradition, the martyrdom of the leaders of faith is not an accident. It is not bad luck. It is not a failure of intelligence or security. Rather, it is a conscious, voluntary sacrifice. The classical sources are explicit about this. A tradition in al-Kafi states that an imam who does not know what will befall him is not a true proof of God. Imam Ali knew his killer. He knew the night. He knew the place. He went to the mosque anyway. Imam Husayn knew what awaited him in Karbala. He was warned by everyone he met on the road. Yet he went anyway. Imam al-Kadhim knew that he would die in prison. He told his companions as much. He accepted it anyway. Now, Imam Khamenei was not a ma'soom. He was not an infallible imam. We do not claim for him what belongs to the 12. But he was a man who walked in their path. And he was a man who 11 days before his death stood before the nation and quoted Imam Husayn's refusal to submit to Yazid. He was a man who for decades said openly, "We are ready for this." He was a man who had already survived one assassination attempt in 1981, a bomb at a prayer gathering that took his right arm from him, and who stood up, brushed off the dust and said, "I still have one hand. That is enough to serve." He knew. He knew that the military buildup in the Persian Gulf was the largest since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. He knew that there was an imbecile in the White House who would be manipulated by the Zionists and, of course, by the Epstein class. He knew the negotiations in Geneva were a thin veil over the real intent. All of this is coming out now. He knew that they wanted him to bow. And he said, with the words of Imam Husayn on his lips, "Someone like me will never give allegiance to someone like Yazid," or in this case, Trump, Netanyahu, the Epstein class. And then he met his Lord. That is not defeat. That is what victory looks like when the scoreboard is kept by God, not by CNN, the BBC and Fox and all of these criminal outfits. So let us bring this to its conclusion. The question tonight is not, why did God allow this to happen? We have answered that. God allows his servants to be tested. God allows the tyrants to overreach. And God raises his martyrs to stations that no living person can attain. And this is the sunnah of God. And you will never find in the sunnah of God any change. In Quran, Surah al-Fath, the chapter of victory, 48th chapter of the Quran, verse 23. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "And you will never find any change in the way or sunnah of God." The question tonight is not, has Imam Khamenei lost? We've answered that also. The Quran says he's alive. It says he's rejoicing. It says there is no fear upon him and there is no grief. The question tonight, the only question that matters, is about us. How did he live? He lived as a servant of the Imam of his time. He lived as a guardian of Islamic jurisprudence and ideology. He lived as a shield for the oppressed. He lived as a man who said to the greatest military powers on earth, "No, I will not bow. My nation will not bow. Mithli lam yubaya' mithlek. Someone like me will never bow down to someone like you." And now, how will we live? Will we honor his blood by holding firm to that path, or will we betray it by wavering? Will we be the ones described in Surah Al-Ahzab with the words وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا, and they will never change, and they have never changed rather? Or will we be those others, the ones the verse was contrasted with, the ones who promised and broke their promise when the pressure came? This is the test. This is where we are. That is the only question. And to answer it properly, we need to understand our practical duties. As followers of the Marja, as believers in the system of Wilayat al-Faqih, and as servants of the Imam of our time, may our souls be his ransom. And that is what we will turn to now. Please give me a salawat and we move on to our practical duties.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل
محمد
على
وآل
محمد وآل
محمد
محمد.
عجل فرجه.
So we've spoken about the theology. We've spoken about what death means and what martyrdom means in our tradition. Now we must speak about something that many people are asking, many of you perhaps are asking, perhaps the very reason some of you have come tonight. The practical question. The question that is burning in the hearts of the believers across the world right now. What do we do? Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, occupied two distinct positions in the lives of millions of believers. For some, he was their Marja al-Taqlid, their source of emulation in matters of religious law. For others, and for the believers as a whole, he was the Wali al-Faqih, the guardian jurist, the supreme leader. These are two separate questions, and they have two separate answers. I want to address both of them clearly tonight, because clarity is what the believers need right now. Not ambiguity, not confusion, not panic. So firstly, let me speak to those of you who followed Imam Khamenei as your Marja al-Taqlid. You are perhaps asking, who do I follow now? Are my prayers still valid? Are the rulings I've been acting upon still sound? Do I need to find a new Marja immediately? Take a breath. The answer is clear and it's well established in our jurisprudence. This is not a crisis. This is normal, albeit deeply painful, but normal. Our scholars have dealt with this for centuries. Every Marja is a mortal human being. And the scholars of our Hawza, in Qom, in Najaf, in every seminary that has served this community, have laid down clear, tested, reliable principles for exactly this moment. The first thing to understand is the concept of what we call remaining on the taqlid of the deceased Marja, what we call al-baqa. There is a scholarly consensus, what we call an ijma', in the Hawza, that a follower, a muqallid, may continue to follow the rulings of a Marja who has passed away. So your prayers are valid, your fasting is valid, the rulings you've been acting upon do not collapse because the Marja has departed this world. But, and this is a critical point, so please listen carefully, the general principle in the Hawza is that continuing to follow a deceased Marja requires the permission of a living Marja. You cannot simply continue on your own authority. You need either to choose a new living Marja to follow, or you need to obtain the permission of a living Marja who authorizes you to continue following the rulings of the deceased. This is not a new principle. This is well-established jurisprudence. And Imam Khamenei himself, the very Marja whose loss we are mourning tonight, articulated this with precision in his awjab istifta'at, or answers to questions regarding practical laws of Islam. When he was asked whether beginning or continuing to follow a deceased mujtahid depends on following a living one, he answered very clearly. He said, the permissibility of starting or continuing to follow a deceased mujtahid depends on the fatwa of the most learned living one. And the reference to all of these are in the write-up. Now, some of you may remember that this exact question arose after the passing of Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, in 1989. Millions of people followed Imam Khamenei as their Marja. When he passed, they asked, can we continue? And Imam Khamenei, as a living Marja, gave them explicit permission to do so, as did Ayatollah Golpaygani, Ayatollah Araki, and others. He told the followers of Imam Khomeini, you may keep following the Imam, and at the time being, there is no reason for you to give up his Taqlid. If the need arises to obtain a Shari'i ruling concerning new issues, you may correspond with our office. And note something important over here. Imam Khamenei's ruling on this matter was broader than that of many of the other Maraja. When he was asked whether continuing with a deceased Marja is limited to issues that the follower or Muqallid had acted upon during the lifetime of the Marja, he answered, continuing to follow a deceased Marja with regard to all issues, even those which he has not acted upon during the lifetime of the Marja, is permissible and entirely valid. All issues, not just the ones you had previously encountered. This is a significant ruling, and it means that his Risala or Awjab Istifta'at, his body of jurisprudential rulings, remains a complete and usable guide, not merely a partial one limited to past practices. He also clarified one further point that is relevant tonight. He was asked, is it specifically the most learned living mujtahid whose permission is needed, or is it sufficient to have the permission of any qualified mujtahid? And his answer, if the scholars are unanimous in their view about the permissibility of continuing with the taqlid of a deceased mujtahid, it is not obligatory to get the permission of the most knowledgeable one. This is important because, as we have said, there is a scholarly consensus on this point. And I don't want you to take my word for it. Let me show you. Let us go through the major living maraji', the highest authorities in the Shia world today, and see what each of them says about this idea of al-baqa' ala taqlid al-mayyit, remaining on the taqlid of a deceased marja. Because when you see the unanimity with your own eyes, you will understand that this is not a matter of dispute. And on that point, since we prepared this session, all the major maraji' of Qum and Najaf have come out and corroborated everything that's being said, and everything is referenced, and you can go and study the write-up and the various points after it to get clarity. So first of all, Ayatullah Sayyid Ali Sistani, may God protect him, the most widely followed marja' in the world today, based in Najaf. His position, as articulated in his Minhaj al-Salihin, which is one of his books of jurisprudential laws, and through his official offices, is very clear. A person cannot begin taqlid of a deceased marja', but a person who was already following a marja' during his lifetime may continue to follow him after his death. And Ayatollah Sistani goes further than some. Even if the muqallid had adopted the marja' but had not yet learned or acted upon all of his rulings, he may still continue. His fatwa permitting baqa is itself the permission. If you take Ayatollah Sistani as your living marja', his ruling authorizes you to remain upon the rulings of Imam Khamenei in the areas where baqa applies, as we've discussed. And particularly, so if Imam Khamenei is considered the a'lam, the most knowledgeable, or at least not less knowledgeable than the living. You can find these references in Minhaj al-Salihin, and the references, like I said, are all in the write-up. Then you have Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, may God protect him, one of the most senior maraji' in the Hawza of Qum. In his Tawzi' al-Masail, his book on the practical laws, he states, baqa is permitted if the person was already doing taqlid of the marja' during his life, and the deceased is equal to or more knowledgeable than the living marja'. For rulings already learnt, continuing is straightforward. For rulings not yet learnt, he permits it under conditions relating to a'lamiyya, the most learned, the idea of the most learned. The principle is the same. Baqa is valid. You can again find all of these references in the write-up. Next you have Ayatullah Husayn Nuri Hamadani, may God protect him, another of the senior Marja of Qom. His position follows the classic Usuli line. No beginning taqlid of a deceased, but baqa is permitted for the person who is already following him, provided the deceased is more knowledgeable or at least not less knowledgeable than the living. His fatwa permitting baqa functions again as the authorization for his muqallideen, his followers, to remain upon their previous marja. And the reference, of course, is in the write-up. You have Ayatullah Muhsin Araki, a recognized mujtahid of the Qom Hawza, and note this well, the very same scholar who now sits on the Provisional Leadership Council of the Islamic Republic. He is, of course, from one of our honorable teachers. He follows the mainstream Usuli position. No starting taqlid of the deceased, but baqa is permitted under the standard conditions. His position aligns entirely with the consensus that we can see taking shape. Then you have Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, the philosopher, the exegete, the student of Allama Tabatabai, whom we quoted earlier on the nature of Wilayat al-Faqih. He too does not permit beginning taqlid of a deceased marja, but he accepts baqa for the person who was already following the marja, with the classical condition on a'lamiyya that we've explained. For issues not yet learnt during the marja's lifetime, he distinguishes, but the core ruling is the same. Baqa is permissible. His rulings, of course, can be found in the write-up. You can find these references, and they're from his istifta'at. So do you see what I'm showing you? 5 of the most eminent living authorities in the Shia world, spanning both Najaf and Qom, spanning different schools of thought and emphasis within the Hawza, and they are unanimous. Not one of them says you cannot continue. Not one of them says that your taqlid of Imam Khamenei is now void. Every single one of them, without exception, and this is just a small subset, there is many, many more, permits baqa ala taqlid al-mayyit, remaining on the taqlid of a deceased marja for the person who was already following that marja. Certainly the details differ slightly, such as the question of a'lamiyya or the scope of issues covered on the precise mechanism and all of this. But the core ruling is identical. And remember what Imam Khamenei himself told us. If the scholars are unanimous in their view about the permissibility of continuing the taqlid of a deceased mujtahid, it is not obligatory to get the permission of the most knowledgeable one. The scholars are unanimous. His own condition is met. So what does that mean for you, practically tonight? It means you have 2 clear paths, and both are valid. The first path, you choose a new living marja' taqlid and you follow him fully. You consult what we call the Ahlul Khibra, the people of expertise. These are the senior scholars, the seminary students, the learned among the community, and I mean genuinely not learned, not people who live and work for the Zionists, but who profess to be learned and call themselves shuyukh. Not those people. Real ulama, real credentialed people. People who are qualified to assess the jurisprudential credentials of the living mujtahideen. The primary criterion, the criterion upon which our scholars are united, is a'lamiyya. You must follow the most knowledgeable among the qualified living jurists. Not the most famous, not the most politically prominent, not the one with the largest following, but the most knowledgeable. Allama Hilli, he writes in Bab Hadi Ashar, he says, the Imam must be designated because infallibility is an inward matter, which none knows except God, exalted is He. Therefore, God must appoint for him, for his servants to make him known to them. The same logic applies in the era of occultation to the selection of a marja. We don't choose a marja based on our personal preference or tribal loyalty. We consult, we ask, we seek out the actual scholars who can guide you towards a correct decision. And the second path, you continue following the rulings of Imam Khamenei, and you do so through a living marja who permits baqa. You identify a living mujtahid, just as we have demonstrated. Every major living marja permits this. And under the authority of his ruling, you continue to act upon the rulings of our martyred leader. The living Marja's fatwa permitting baqa is itself the permission. You are not acting without authority. You are acting under the jurisprudential authority of a living scholar who has ruled that your continuation is valid. And note, this is critical for those of you who followed Imam Khamenei, what he himself ruled in question 41 of his practical laws, that baqa applies to all issues, even those you had not yet acted upon during his lifetime. The reference, of course, in the write-up. This is a broader ruling than many other marajih give. It means his risala, his practical laws, his complete body of rulings remain your guide, not partially, but fully. In either case, you need a connection to a living marja. That is the principle. The chain of taqlid must pass through a living authority. It is not enough to simply say, I will continue on my own. The system, by divine wisdom, requires that a living mujtahid stands as the bridge between you and the jurisprudential tradition. Now I want to be clear about something over here. It is not my place sitting over here to direct you to a specific marja. That is not my role. My role is to explain the process, the jurisprudential framework, and to trust that you, as mature and intelligent believers, will follow. Of course, I'm available, we're all available for questions, for discussions, but we are not going to point you and answer the questions for you. There are eminent, qualified living marajih in both Najaf and Qom. Their offices, their makatib, are accessible. Their risala are published. The scholars around you can help you identify the right one, the genuine scholars around you. As you know, or maybe you don't, we have a project that is working to make their material much more accessible and to also make it easier and frictionless to communicate and consult with the various offices of the marajih. And with God's grace, this project, which is called Fiqh Flow, will soon become a reality. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. What I will say is this: do not rush. You are not in a state of emergency regarding your daily religious practice. Your existing rulings remain your guide while you take the time to consult properly, to ask the right people, and to make an informed, conscientious decision. This is not a race, it is a responsibility. Treat it with the weight that it deserves. And do not let anyone exploit this moment to push you in one direction or another for any number of reasons, be they political, social, cultural, tribal, or any other reason. The marja'iyya is a sacred trust. It belongs to the realm of knowledge and piety, not to the realm of political maneuvering, tribal niceties, or even groupthink. Choose based on a'lamiyya, on knowledge, on piety, on justice, and nothing else. Please give me a salawat. We move on to the point about Wilayat al-Faqih.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So now let me turn to the second question, the question of the Wilayat al-Faqih and the leadership of the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Revolution as a whole. This is where many of us are anxious, and I understand why. The images coming out of Iran, the bombings and such, are quite frightening. The strikes are ongoing. We can see the enemies, the runaways, the Taghutis. We see them celebrating on social media and in the streets. And I want to pause on that word, celebrating, because it brings to mind something that every one of us in this room knows by heart. Something we recite on the day of Ashura, something many of us recite daily. Something from Ziyarat Ashura, where he says, where we're taught, Allahumma inna hadha yawmun tabarrakat bihi banu Umayyah. God, O God, this is the day wherein which Banu Umayyah considered themselves blessed, and that son of the liver eater. And this is the day on which the family of Ziyad and the family of Marwan rejoiced because of their killing of Husayn. The blessings of God be upon him. The family of Ziyad rejoiced. The family of Marwan celebrated. They held banquets in Damascus. They congratulated each other. They thought they had won. Look at your screens today. Look at the BBC. Look at CNN. Look at Fox. Look at Iran International. Look at all of these criminal outfits. Look at the press conferences given by the Orange Man. Look at the media coverage. Look at all of the triumphalism. Look at Lindsey Graham. Donald Trump stood at his podium and boasted about what he had done, as though destroying a nation's leader while negotiations are ongoing for the second time is something to celebrate. The first time in June of last year, 2025, they struck while talks were progressing, and now, again, with Geneva producing real dialogue, or so we're led to believe, with the deal within reach, they struck again. Because there are those who do not want peace. They are those for whom the very existence of an independent Islamic government is intolerable. Netanyahu, the creature who has overseen the genocide in Gaza, the criminal, the war criminal, who has overseen the butchery of Lebanon, the starvation of children, the bombing of hospitals, stood before the cameras and arrogantly spoke of a new dawn. Lindsey Graham, who has never met a war he would not cheer for, spoke of the beginning of the end for the regime. And the son of the dead Shah, a man who has spent 40 years in Maryland conspiring with the Netanyahus of this world and the Epsteins of this world, begging foreign powers to bomb his own country so that he might return to a peacock throne that the people of Iran chose to remove from under his father. This criminal also celebrated. Al-Ziyad wa al-Marwan. The names change, the faces change, the pattern does not. They killed Imam Husayn and they celebrated. And where are they now? They killed our leader Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, and now they celebrate. And where will they be? I will tell you where. In the same dustbin of history where every tyrant who raised his hand up against the righteous has ended up. Not one of them survives. Not one. Look at history. Not one of them is remembered except a villain, as a villain in the story of the men or man that they killed. And let me say something about the cost of this celebration. Let me say something about the cost of this celebration. Because the triumphalism on their screens hides a reality they do not wish to show their people. The Islamic Republic of Iran has responded, as it has a right to respond, as any nation would respond when its sovereignty is violated and its leader is assassinated. And the retaliatory strikes that have taken the lives of over 500, yes, over 500 American servicemen and women in the West Asia region. 500 families who will never see their sons and daughters again. And for what? For the perverted ambitions of this Satanist Netanyahu? For the fantasies of the deposed prince in Maryland? For the political theater of the Orange Man? Political theater of the Orange Man who confuses destruction with strength? The blood of those soldiers is not on Iran's hands. It is on the hands of those who chose war when peace was within reach, who chose a war of choice. It is on the hands of those who torpedoed negotiations, not once but twice, because they could not stomach a world in which the Islamic Republic of Iran exists, where Islam and the banner of La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah, stands tall. But this is not a political session. And I don't want to give those people more of our time than they deserve. Because the ziyarah teaches us something else, something more important than the names of the oppressors. It teaches us that God keeps account. Allahumma la'an. O God, curse them. Remove them from your mercy, O God. We leave them to God's reckoning. And we turn to what matters. The survival of the system that they try to destroy. And the question on everyone's lips is, will the system survive? I want to answer this with theology first and then with the constitutional process, because both are needed. Grand Ayatullah Jawadi Amali, one of the foremost philosophers and jurists of the Qom, a student of both Allama Tabatabai and Imam Khamenei, has articulated the principle of Wilayat al-Faqih with a clarity that we need tonight more than ever. He says, Wilayat al-Faqih means the Islamic society should not be without a guardian. The Faqih, the jurist, is not a separate weave from others. Rather, he is an expert in Islamic matters who, under certain conditions, undertakes the leadership of the society. The guardianship of the jurist is, in reality, the guardianship of the jurist of jurisprudence and religion, not the guardianship of a person. I want you to hold on to that last sentence. The guardianship of the guardianship is of the jurisprudence. It is of the religion. It is not the guardianship of a person. This is the key. This is the answer to the anxiety in all of our hearts. When Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, built the Islamic Republic, when he developed the theory, the concept, or rather revived the concept of Wilayat al-Faqih, he did not build a system around himself. He built a system around an idea. The idea that Islamic law must govern. The idea that during the occultation of the 12th Imam, may our souls be his ransom, a qualified jurist must stand in his place to ensure that the community is not left without guidance. The idea that governance is a religious obligation, not merely a political convenience. Imam Khamenei died. The idea survived. Imam Khamenei has been martyred. Yet the idea continues to survive, and it will survive the next leader and the one after that, because the system is not held together by the charisma of any one man. It is held together by divine principle, that the earth cannot be devoid of a hujjah, and that in the absence of the Imam, the most qualified jurist must stand as his deputy. So now, the mechanism. Let me explain exactly what is happening right now and what will happen next. The Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was itself designed by the scholars of the Hawza, such as Shaheed Beheshti and others, is based upon jurisprudential principles, has a very clear procedure for all of this. It is found in Article 111 of the Constitution. When the Supreme Leader passes away or is unable to fulfill his duties, the following process is activated. Step 1. The Provisional Leadership Council. The powers of the Supreme Leader are immediately transferred to the 3-member council. The council consists of the President of the Islamic Republic, currently Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian. The second person is the head of the judiciary, currently it's Ayatullah Ghulam Hussain Mohsin Ejai. And 1 jurist from the Guardian Council, selected by the Expediency Discernment Council. And as of today, that is Ayatollah Ali Rida A'rafi, the head of Iran's Islamic seminary system and the Friday prayer leader of Qom. The council has already been formed. This was announced on Sunday, 1 day after the martyrdom. 1 day. The system activated within hours, perhaps within minutes. Second step is the Assembly of Experts. What we call the Majlis Kobragan Rahbari, the Assembly of Experts, is a body of 88 senior elected jurists. Their sole constitutional purpose, the reason they exist, is to supervise the Supreme Leader and, when necessary, to select a new one. They are constitutionally mandated to convene and select a new leader as soon as possible. This is the same body that selected Imam Khamenei in 1989. It has done this before. Let me remind you of how it happened then, because the parallel is instructive and reassuring. When Imam Khamenei, may God rest his pure soul, passed away on the 3rd of June 1989, the nation was plunged into grief that many of you who are old enough will remember. Millions of people attended his funeral. The country was in a state of shock. There were real fears that the Islamic Republic, barely 10 years old, still very scarred by the imposed war, the Iran-Iraq 8-year war, would not survive the loss of its founder. The Assembly of Experts convened on the morning of June 4th. 1 day later, there was a debate. Some members initially favoured a leadership council, a collective leadership rather than a single person. But a consensus formed that a single leader was needed. And then Ayatullah Hashemi Rafsanjani, the Speaker of the Parliament, one of the most senior figures in the country, stood before the assembly and delivered a testimony. He recounted a conversation in the presence of Imam Khamenei. He said, in a meeting where I was with Imam Khamenei, with Mr. Khamenei, and another official in the presence of the Imam, a discussion arose, and we spoke of the future of the leadership and its vacuum. The Imam Khamenei said, as long as you have someone like al-Khamenei, like Mr. Khamenei, you should not worry about a leadership vacuum. The reference for this is in the write-up, of course, like with all references. And then the senior Marja of the time, the highest authorities in the Shia world, endorsed the decision. Grand Ayatollah Muhammad Reza Golpaygani, may God rest his soul, one of the most eminent scholars of the century, issued a statement where he said, Your Excellencies, referring to Imam Khamenei, Your Excellency's worthy selection by the Assembly of Experts has brought about hope and tranquility. I congratulate the remainder of God, Baqiyatullah, Imam Mahdi, may our souls be sacrificed for him, and Your Excellency on this selection, and I consider it my duty to follow your guidance. This is a Marja, Ayatollah Golpaygani, may God rest his pure soul. You also have Ayatollah Muhammad Ali Araki, who said, the worthy selection of Your Excellency, who is a deserving and committed individual, is a source of encouragement and hope for the Iranian nation. I consider obedience to your orders obligatory upon myself and upon all believers. The references are all in the write-up. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So the system worked. The assembly convened. A leader was chosen. The senior scholars endorsed him. The community accepted him. And the Islamic Republic did not just survive, it endured for 36 more years, standing firm against everything the world threw at it. That is the precedent. That is the proof that the system functions. And that is what will happen again now. But I must be honest with you. The circumstances today are very different from 1989 in one critical way. In 1989, the nation was at peace. The assembly could convene in safety. The scholars could deliberate without the sound of bombs overhead. Today, as we sit here, strikes are continuing. The military situation is active. It is possible, and I need to be transparent about this, that the Assembly of Experts may not be able to convene immediately, although I have it on good authority that they are convening in a virtual manner. This is from a call I had earlier today. Not because the system has failed, but because the physical security situation may require time in order to stabilize. But this does not mean the system has collapsed. The Provisional Leadership Council is functioning. The state is operating. The constitutional process is underway. And reports indicate that Imam Khamenei himself, in the period before his martyrdom, particularly after the last war of June 2025, had already requested the Assembly of Experts to prepare for the question of succession. There are also reports, which I can neither confirm nor deny, that he had identified 3 senior clerics as candidates. But these names are not names you will find in Politico or Foreign Policy or any of these magazines, because these people have no idea. The Assembly has been examining potential successors in recent years. This was not left to chance. So I say to you, be patient. Do not fall prey to the propaganda of those who wish for the system to collapse. The enemies of Islam are celebrating precisely because they hope this will be the end. Our duty, our taklif shara'i, religious duty, is to prove them wrong. Through patience, through prayer, through trust in God and in the system that He allowed to be established. And remember the words of Imam Khamenei himself in the very first words he spoke as leader in 1989, when he inherited this trust from Imam Khomeini. He said, "This path is the path of the Imam. We will follow the same path and we will pursue the same goals, and there will be no change in our policies. Whoever stands at that podium next will say the same thing. Not because it's a scripted line, but because it is the truth. The path does not change. The ideology does not change. The system does not change. Only the torchbearer changes. And the torch is still burning. And finally, for those who are still wondering what authority guides all of this, what scriptural foundation underpins the entire system of deputies, scholars and religious councils and leadership councils, let me leave you with the words of the one who matters most. The Imam of our time, al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, may our souls be his ransom and may God hasten his return. And we've discussed this in our Mahdawiyya sessions, so I'll be brief. In a directive to Ishaq ibn Yaqub, the Imam said, as for the events that will occur, refer regarding them to the narrators of our tradition, which is synonymous with the jurists, for they are my proof upon you, and I am the proof of God upon them. The references are in the write-up. The scholars are the proof of the Imam upon us. The Imam is the proof of God upon them. And God is above all. The chain is intact. The system is intact. The proof is intact. Follow the real scholars. Know and believe and trust in the process. And do not change. Before we close, before we turn to the eulogy and the supplication, let me draw out 3 lessons. 3 things to carry with you when you leave this gathering tonight. The first lesson, the system is stronger than the individual. This is the genius of what the Ahlulbayt, peace and blessings be upon them, established. From the first Imam to the 12th, from the era of manifest presence to the era of occultation, from the nas of the Imams, the designation of the Imams, to the Marja'iyya of the jurists, to the Wilayat al-Faqih of the Islamic Republic. The system was never designed to depend on one human being. It was designed to ensure that when one falls, another rises. We mourn the man, may God rest his pure soul, and we mourn him deeply. But we trust the institution. We trust the process. We trust the principle that the earth cannot be devoid of a hujjah. And we trust the directive of our Imam. Refer to the narrators of our traditions, for they are my proof upon you. The chain has never been broken in 1400 years. It will not be broken now. The second lesson, our response defines us. How we respond to this trial is itself a test. It is what we call an imtihan. It is part of the sifting that we have previously discussed at length. The Imam of our time is watching. The angels are recording. And the question is being asked of us. The question that Surah Al-Ahzab puts to every generation is, will you change? Will you respond with despair or with intidhar, with active, purposeful anticipation and effort for the return of the Imam? Will you respond with fear or with the courage of Imam Husayn at Karbala, who faced an army of thousands and did not blink? Will you respond with division or with the unity that our tradition demands of us, not only just in moments of crisis, but at all times? The enemies of Islam are watching us tonight. They struck the head and they are waiting to see if the body will fall. I say to them, and I say to you, this body is held together by something they do not understand. It is held together by a covenant with God. And وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. We have not changed, and God willing, we will not change. The third lesson, this is a call to action, not to passivity. Do not go home tonight and do nothing. Do not sit in front of your screens and consume grief. Grief without action is an indulgence. Tears without purpose are wasted water. Pray more, and I mean literally. Lengthen your night prayer. Read more Quran, it's the month of Ramadan. Give sadaqah for the soul of our martyred leader. Give sadaqah for the return of Imam al-Hujjah and that we are ready for him. Learn more. If you do not know the basics of your belief, your theology, and your fiqh, now is the time to learn. If you do not have a risala of your Marja, go and get one. If you have never attended a class teaching you Islamic sciences, Islamic thought, even a Hausa class, attend one. The scholars are the proof of the Imam upon you, but you must go to them. You must seek knowledge. You must equip yourself. Teach your children. Tell them who Imam Khamenei was. Tell them why he mattered. Tell them the story of Karbala, not as just like a story, but a lesson. Tell them about the Imams. Use the material that we have built up over the months and years. You can find it all on our website, reflection313.com. Tell them about the occultation, the culminating guidance, as we've termed it in our sessions. Give them the tools to navigate a world that is hostile to everything we believe. Because the next generation is the generation that may witness the return of the Imam, and they must be ready. Support your communities. Strengthen the bonds between each other, between you. Help the poor amongst you. Resolve the disputes amongst yourselves. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, has said, "Shall I tell you what is better than prayer and fasting and charity? It is reconciliation between people, or reconciling between people." Now is the time for that. And finally, do not let the enemies of Islam see a community in disarray. Let them see a community that is unshakable, a community that buries its dead with dignity and then rises with purpose, a community that does not need any one person to survive because it is connected to the inexhaustible divine source that never runs dry. Please give me a salawat and we move to the eulogy and the supplication and then the close.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So now let me speak about the man. Not the institution, not the office, not the constitutional position, the man. He was born in Mashhad, the city of Imam al-Rida, on the 17th of July 1939. His father was a scholar. His grandfather was a scholar. He was raised in the house of knowledge in the shadow of the shrine of the 8th Imam. He went to Qom as a young man. He studied under the greatest minds of the century, under Imam Khamenei himself, under Allama Tabatabai, under Shaheed Mutahari, and many others. He did not study to gain a title. He studied to serve. And then came the revolution, and he was in the streets. He was in the prisons, he was arrested, he was tortured, he was exiled, he was beaten, and he did not break. On the 27th of June 1981, in a prayer gathering in Tehran, a bomb planted by the Munafiqeen Khalq, the MEK or MKO, US and Israel sponsored group that is still trying to create problems in Iran and across the world, a bomb planted by these criminals exploded beside him. It destroyed the use of his right hand permanently. For the rest of his life, he could not use his right arm. And what did he say? He said, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, that God had given him one hand for prayer and one hand for revolution. And now God was telling him to focus entirely on prayer because prayer is the source of revolution. He turned a wound into worship. 2 years later, he became the president of the Islamic Republic. And then in 1989, when Imam Khamenei departed this world, the Assembly of Experts looked at the nation and asked, who? And the answer came back from the testimony of Mr. Rafsanjani, from the endorsement of Ayatullah Golpaygani and Ayatollah Araki, from the scholars and the soldiers and the people who knew him, Sayyid Ali Khamenei. He is the one. And for 36 years, he carried that trust. He was not a man of grand gestures. He was not a man of noise. He was a man of discipline, of consistency, of steel conviction wrapped in quiet patience. He read, he wrote. We have been honored to study some of his works, and in the coming months and years, we will continue. with God's grace, to continue to learn from him. He composed poetry. He wept when he recited the Quran, and there are videos that millions of people have seen of this man, the leader of a nation, the commander of armies, the leader of the Islamic revolution, weeping like a child when the verses of God were recited in his presence, or when the mention of Ahlulbayt's suffering was delivered in his presence. That is not the weeping of a politician. That is the weeping of a servant who knows his master. He stood against the Zionist project for 36 years and he did not flinch. He stood against the internal enemies, the hypocrites, the agents, the fifth columnists, the traitors, and he did not flinch. He buried his loved ones. Haj Qasim Sulaimani, Haj Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, Shaheed Ismail Haniyya, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and many, many others, one by one. The pillars around him were taken, and he did not flinch. And in his final speech, his very last public address, he did not talk about missiles or negotiations or geopolitics. He spoke about Imam Husayn, and he said, وَمِثْلِي لَمْ يُبَايَعْ مِثْلَهُ. Someone like me will never give allegiance to someone like Yazid or like him. And then they killed him. And I say to you tonight, with the conviction of everything I have studied and everything I believe, they did not defeat him. Rather, they confirmed him. They proved that he was telling the truth, because only the truthful die like this. Only the truthful are killed by the tyrants. Only the truthful end their lives with the words of Imam Husayn on their lips. So we say to him tonight, O our leader, you carried the trust that was placed upon your shoulders on that day in 1989, when the nation was orphaned by the passing of Imam Khamenei. And you carried it faithfully for 36 years. You did not waver, you did not compromise, you did not bend. You stood against the greatest military powers on earth, and you did not blink. And now they have taken your body from us. But they have not taken what you built. They have not taken the system you protected. They have not taken the faith that you nourished. They have not taken the Imam that you served. You are with Imam Husayn now. You are with Imam Ali now. You are now with Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra. You are with Rasulullah, the Prophet of God now. And we remain. And we will continue. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. May God send His blessings upon Prophet Muhammad and the family of Prophet Muhammad and hasten their relief. This is now the supplication. The first part is for our martyred leader. O God, accept the soul of your servant, Imam Sayyed Ali ibn Sayyid Jawad al-Husayni al-Khamenei, in the ranks of the truthful and the martyrs. Elevate his station, illuminate his grave with the light of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Grant him the companionship of those he served, the companionship of Ali and Fatima and Hassan and Hussein, and the 9 Imams from the progeny of Hussein. Reward him, O Lord, for every prayer he led, for every tear he shed for your Hussein, for every night he stood in your service when the world was sleeping, for every wound he bore without complaint, for every year he carried the weight of this trust upon his shoulders. And reunite him with Haj Qasim and Sayyid Hassan and all the martyrs of this path, so that they may stand together in your presence as they stood together in this world, an unbroken line of servants who did not change. The second part for the believers. O God, grant patience and steadfastness to the believers. Unite our hearts. Protect us from despair. Protect us from division. Protect us from the whispering of the hypocrites who wish to see us scatter. Grant us the wisdom to navigate this trial as the companions of the Imams navigated theirs, with faith, with unity, and with unshakable trust in your plan. Make us among those described in your book, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ, among the believers who have been true to their covenant with you, and never let us change. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. Next, for the scholars and the leaders. O God, guide the assembly of experts, guide the scholars of Qom and Najaf. Grant them wisdom and unity and courage. Protect them from the plots of the enemies, and grant them the clarity to choose a leader who is worthy of this trust, a leader who will walk the path of Imam Khomeini and Imam Khamenei, a leader who will serve the Imam of our time with that same devotion. For the Islamic Republic and the oppressed. O God, protect the Islamic Republic of Iran. We know it's not perfect. No human institution is, in the absence of the infallible Imam. But it is an institution built on the principle of your governance, an institution that sought to implement your law and prepared the ground for the return of your Hujjah. Protect it from those who seek to destroy it. Protect its people, its men, its women, its children, its elderly, from the bombs that are falling as we speak. And be with the oppressed in Iran, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in every land where your servants are being crushed beneath the boots of the arrogant, even in the West. Grant them victory. O Lord, grant them relief. Grant them patience until the relief comes. For the reappearance. O God, hasten the reappearance of your Hujjah. If we have ever needed him, if the world has ever needed him, it is now. The tyrants are drunk on their power. The bombs are falling on the innocents. The bombing in Gaza has not stopped. The mosques are shaking. The shrines are threatened. The believers are scattered. Send him, O Lord. Send the one who will fill the earth with justice as it has been filled with oppression. Send the grandson of Husayn. Send the son of Hassan al-Askari. Send the Hujjah, Muhammad ibn al-Hassan, the one who will rise from the family of Muhammad. We have waited for over 1,000 years, and we will wait as long as you decree. But tonight we ask with a broken heart and a voice that trembles, hasten his return. And until he comes, until the dawn breaks, we renew our covenant. We renew it with the words that your servants have spoken every morning since the gates of the minor occultation were sealed. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. O God, be for your deputy, the Hujjah, the son of Hassan. Your blessings be upon him and upon his forefathers, in this hour and in every hour, a guardian, a protector, a leader, a helper, a guide and a watcher, until you bring him to dwell in your earth willingly and let him enjoy therein for a long time. O Imam Mahdi, your deputy has been taken from us, but we have not abandoned you. We have not changed. We will find another to carry the banner, and we will continue to wait, not with idle hands, but with busy hands and full hearts, until you come. And may God send his blessings upon Muhammad and his pure household. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. وآخر الدعواني الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.